How to retire? Know what enough means in retirement. One big question that people often grapple with as they contemplate retirement is whether they'll have enough financially and otherwise in retirement. In today's video, we are going to unpack some wisdoms about what retiring with enough really means. If you are serious about retirement, stay till the end of this video as we discuss multiple aspects of finance and beyond money. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Investment Diary channel. If you're interested in in-depth finance and investment analysis like this, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the Investment Diary channel for more content. Okay, let's dive right into our video for today. So let's start with the financial piece. The first is debt reduction, or ideally, debt elimination. It used to be nobody went into retirement with a mortgage. And credit cards weren't so prevalent back in the days when our parents were retiring, and student loans weren't an issue. And so I encourage people to really think about where they are with their debt load. I realize saying debt elimination may make people think, what are you smoking? But that's really what I think is one of the cornerstones that is not talked about enough. The second piece is cash flow, and there are two sides to that. The first is, what do you believe a sustainable withdrawal rate is? There's a lot of debate in the industry about whether it's still the 4%, could it be 5%, or is it actually 2%? So thinking about where you fall on that, and whether the amount of money you'll need to take out of your portfolio where it falls relative to that number. Given that you may have other sources of income coming in from rental property or Social Security or part-time work. And then the other piece of that cash flow is that the order of returns when you retire makes a huge difference. If you retire into a bull market, you're in great shape. If you retire into a bear market and you are pulling out money when assets are depressed, it can really shake up the statistical odds of not outliving your money. And so I encourage people before they retire to be really strategic about how they're going to access the money they need for the first 5 years. And if you're conservative like me, the first 10 years, so that you know you do not have to sell depressed assets in order to execute your retirement plan. And then the very last point is asset allocation. And people often think about that as, oh, what's the right mix of stocks, bonds, and cash when I head into retirement? And as we talked about, that cash piece is huge. But bonds and stocks are something I find a lot of people may not be thinking about in the right ways, in the sense that people aren't always thinking about liquidity and quality. A number of people I've come across have equity investments that are tied up. Maybe they're in private equity or venture funds, and then other people have fixed income because, there's an issue with rates. So they move down the quality curve and they've actually got some pretty risky stuff in their fixed income. And so, kind of reassessing. So those are the three things that I feel like really need to be talked about when it comes to the math. Yeah, and that's a really helpful starting point. I wanted to talk about the dimension of your own spending and how it might change as you move through the retirement life cycle. I think for many of us, the life that we envision living when we are just retired will probably be different in 10 years and 20 years down the line. So how should people factor that in? Kind of potential changes in spending as we age. I think this is one of the most important questions when assessing whether you're going to have enough money, because so often when people do an analysis, they assume straight-line spending. And my observation is almost nobody has straight-line spending. Generally, the trend works something like this. From ages, let's call it 55 to 65, if you're entering into retirement in that zone, generally you're in the living it up stage. And, maybe you're working part-time, maybe you've got healthcare, maybe you're in exchange healthcare, but you're spending it all out because you're thinking, I don't know when this is going to end. You've had friends that have passed unexpectedly, and mortality is something on your mind. God willing, in the stage from 65 to 75, you're hitting your retirement groove, and you're diving into all of those hobbies and activities and volunteer work and family time, and so healthy spending there. And then generally what I see is from age 75 onward, even if you don't have a health crisis, and so many people do, your body just slows down, you're exhausted, and so you may be mentally active, but the ways in which you engage in your life oftentimes are much less expensive. One thing a lot of people don't like to think about, but as if you own your home outright, you didn't go into retirement with a mortgage, or you got out of it pretty soon. You can think about a reverse mortgage potentially as being the source of funds to help provide for in-home care if you need it. Another thing that I am strongly encouraging people to research is multi-stage retirement communities. Do some research and see which arrangement fits your retirement style. Sometimes people do treat retirement planning as a kind of a math problem. They focus strictly on the numbers. But let's talk about the non-financial dimension of deciding whether to retire, because you really do have to think about where you will go for purpose, what your relationships are outside of work. So, the first thing I want to say to anybody who is working is that not all of us get to choose when we're going to retire. I have been blown away by the number of friends I have who have had surprise layoffs. In particular, friends who worked in tech and had these careers find themselves in kind of their late 50s as tech companies are shedding people. They're often able to be replaced at much lower cost labor because the folks replacing them are younger. And it's difficult. It's difficult to get a job when you're that close to retirement. It just is. And I truly have been shocked at the wide range of industries and how many people I know have had that situation, in addition to being forced to retire because of health. And so that's the first thing to know, is you may not be able to go through this exercise. So you're blessed if you get to go through this exercise. And so what I tell people is, you want to ask yourself, are you running from something or are you running towards something? And there's an exercise I've done for years when working with people on their personal finances, which is to say, if you woke up and you were gifted $10 million after tax and told you have exactly 10 years to live, what would you stop doing and what would you start doing? And pretty much universally, people say they'd stop working. And pretty universally, they say they'd start traveling, volunteering, spending time with family and friends, learning a language, instrument, hobbies. And so I encourage people to really think about what's the motivation for retirement. The closer you get towards running towards something, it's more of a sign that you're ready. And another thing is really like what intrinsically makes you happy. And we can talk about this a little later because sometimes what makes us happy can be toxic. Yes, that sense of identity that a lot of us get from our work. People with prestigious careers often really struggle with that when they retire. They're leaving a job that conferred a lot of prestige and going out into the world where people don't necessarily know who they are, what they did, what they achieved. Do you have any thoughts about that? About making that transition to kind of downshift and move away from some of those activities that conferred outward prestige? So what I think is helpful for people is to ask themselves these two questions. Okay, what are the benefits that I get from working? What are the things that are giving me a high? And what are some other ways I could replicate them? And then the reverse question is, what have you missed out in life on because of work? And what specific steps could you start to take to add some of those things back into your life? And when you're able to get a positive answer to, or an answer that feels authentic to you on both sides, I find that's the sweet spot where somebody is absolutely 100% ready to dive into retirement. Look, here's the thing. No one ever gets to 100% ready, but theoretically, those questions can help you see where you are on that spectrum. When we think about people who have successful jobs, so I guess the bottom line that I'm trying to say is it's not a life switch. It doesn't have to be on and off. For some people it is, but it can also be a dimmer. And for people who are type A and still wanted a foot in the game, but not the toxic part, edema is a great way to think about it. If you have made it this far in this video, congratulations. Here are some key takeaways. First, the role of debt reduction or elimination as increasingly older adults are carrying not just mortgage debt, but student loans into and credit card debt into retirement. Now that yields are higher on safe investments, it's hard to make a case for rushing to pay a mortgage with a very low interest rate. But if you have a debt with a rate of more than 5%, it's usually wise to pay it off because it's impossible to outturn a higher rate of return by investing in the market. Next, the continuing care retirement communities as an attractive option for some older adults. I would warn, though, that the financial aspects of these communities can get very complicated. So, ideally, you'd get some objective advice about whether going into such a community is a good decision for you. Finally, some people feel like they're losing their identities when they retire. Try to carry forward the aspects of your job that you loved later in life, while leaving the parts of working that you didn't love as much. Of course, that's easier said than done, but it's a worthy aspiration. Now, I would love to hear it from you. What are your thoughts on retirement? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and make sure to subscribe to the Investment Diary channel for more investment and finance content. See you in the next diary.